The other country I was going to tell you about was Liberia. Now, Liberia isn't exactly a case of a vicious cycle of the system inexorably reforming itself, reasserting itself after a revolution. But the reason why I include Liberia is because of what it says about human nature. For much of the 1800s, there was a common belief in America that multiracial society could never function. Most of the founding fathers believed it. Abraham Lincoln believed it earlier in his life, before his friendship with people like Frederick Douglass, led to him kind of liberalizing his thoughts. The U.S. was effectively a white ethno state, de facto, if not formally. And there was this common idea that if slavery was an evil both for its effect on the black man and the white man, then it would have to be it would have to come to an end. But something had to be done with the people who lived in this country. And a common proposal was to send them to somewhere else. And James Monroe ends up sponsoring this private charity, the American Colonization Society, that looked for volunteers. They offered to them, we will pay for your trip across the ocean and give you basic supplies if you're willing to leave the country. You will be able to have your own Black Republic. You'll be able to have your own Black America back in the homeland from which your people were wrenched. There weren't a lot of takers. Most Black folks in this country didn't want to go back to Africa. They weren't from Africa, not after several generations. Their great-great-great-grandpa might have been, but they weren't. Even if they suffered under an unjust society, most people have a natural love of the land in which they're raised. But there were some takers. And they end up getting this little patch of West African coast, a Black colony that they name Liberia. Name it in the name of liberty, with a capital Monrovia named for James Monroe. And they draft up a fine constitution that lays out this moving, declaration of the dignity of the individual and the natural rights that God made all men free. And in that constitution, they ban slavery. At this time, they're still one of the first. They're definitely not the first, but they're one of the first countries to do this. But then they're confronted with a problem. See, these American Black people had become a nation unto themselves in their time in America. They were at once both part of the American nation, but they were also a nation apart from it too. They still had folk ways from old Africa, but they had taken on the English language. They had taken on the Christian, especially Baptist religion. They had taken on most of the customs of the whites. Much of this stuff was forced on them. In a lot of very important senses, Black America had become a part of Europe in every way, except for their literal appearance, the most superficial thing of all. And so they get off the ships, and like the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, like the Virginians at Jamestown, One of the first problems they had to deal with is, what do we do about the natives? Because these were not their people. If they happen to have some ancestry from the local tribes, and of course, Black America was drawn from the whole west coast of Africa. But even if they happen to share some ancestry with them, for all practical purposes, these people were more alien to them than the whites back home were. And the Liberians begin to feel a contempt for them. They look on their pagan religion with disgust. They look on their strange sorts of clothing with disgust. They look on their forms of social organization, like the matriarchal family, with disgust. They think to themselves, these people are savages. They're different from us. They're not like us at all. And we know the right way to live. We're going to have to do something about them. We're going to have to bring these people civilization. And the Liberians, well, they have another problem. They have a great shortage of labor. And so they come up with this grand vision of how they're going to bring civilization to the interior. They're going to take the natives, beat them down by force, and then compel them to work on plantations and to work on behalf of the government. It's for their own good. But it's not slavery. It's not slavery because they banned it in their constitution. No, it's something else. If you ever read 1984 by George Orwell, during my fall spring semester, I tend to have an announcement about him. I'll probably have an announcement for you. But if you ever read 1984, sorry, no, Animal Farm. If you ever read Animal Farm, then you might remember the scene with the pigs. See, the pigs had led all the farm animals in a rebellion against the farmer. And then the pigs, they start getting a bunch of good ideas. And it's all a metaphor for communism. By the end of it, the pigs have made everything so much like the old regime that they have taken to walking on two legs and wearing clothes and smoking and drinking like the farmers. And all the other farm animals, the mules and the chickens and the cows and all them, they're watching them through the windows of the farmer's house, and they can't tell the difference anymore. The Liberians, the American Liberians, are going to build towns with names like Kentucky in Africa, Mississippi in Africa, Maryland County. They build themselves great big mansions, colored white with great big columns and Grecian architecture. They hold balls where the women come out dressed in the hoop skirts and they dance around with the men dressed in the three-piece suits and the top hats as they're waited on by a group of people that they consider inferior because they are darker than them. The Liberians had the chance to make a United States of Africa, and on nobody's will but their own, they created Confederate States of Africa. What does that say about the human condition? There is this myth, propaganda of our day I hate so much. It's this idea that slavery was in some way motivated by hatred. It's an idea that is so commonly repeated, yet is so foolish on the face of it. The planter class of America lived surrounded by their slaves 24/7. They chose to bring them into the US. They tried their damnedest to grow the slave stock as much as they could. They would even have little beds at the foot of their bed, like a mat on the floor at the foot of the bed, where their servants would sleep during the night, just in case they needed them to like go bring them a glass of milk right away. You can, if you want to read more on this, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote a lot about attitudes towards race in the North and the South. And it's the opposite of what you would expect. But I don't believe the planters ever hated their slaves. It was greed and selfishness that was the motivating force. I remember being at a rice plantation in Charleston once and looking out on the irrigation canals they built. They had these locks, and it was all stuff that uh, the Gala people knew how to build. They did this back in Africa, and they imported the technology, they imported the know-how to America. And I remember feeling this deep anger looking at it because I could see the proof before my eyes that the planters never believed in their own shit, because it's obvious that it would take an intelligent civilization of humans to make something like that. All of the racial superiority crap was an ex post rationalization for a desire to live off of other people's work, to rob other people. And you can see that here too. A group of people who felt justifiably very indignant about the way they had been abused took no time at all to flip the script and become everything they had condemned once given the chance to do so. It's universal to all people. But what happened to Liberia? In the end, Liberia, it chugged along for a long time. Rubber was what they made. In the South, it was cotton. In Haiti, it was sugar. In Liberia, it was rubber. The Firestone Company invested a lot in the country. And it chugged along, functional, but not really growing much until the 1990s, when the Liberian people themselves rose in revolt, and an adventurer named Charles Taylor couped the government. After that, the place collapsed into brutal civil war. And now the place is mostly talked about in reference to its one most famous warlord, General Butt Naked. So named because he would go into battle butt naked, and he also sacrificed children to the devil until he eventually retired, repented, and became a Baptist preacher. General Butt Naked is a very interesting figure. I include him for the shock value, right? But I'll send you the documentary on him if you want to watch it. When Liberia collapsed, it collapsed into absolute chaos, and it has not come out of it since. But now we'll bring this back to where we kind of started, Europe and America. I'll see you in the next one.